Well, thank you, Tasha, and thank you, Chancellor Ward. Inspiring remarks, the history of engagement on our campus, the involvement of the Chancellor, and I think the touching story, Tasha, that you reminded us why we do this, why we are interested at all in engaged work, and that is to make the difference in people's lives. People who could use our insights from the university, and we who need insights from those we work with in the community. Together, then, we work to resolve some of the most pressing and complex problems in the communities and societies that we work with today. So this is transition time. We're kicking off our first group of TED Talk speakers here. Each of our speakers knows that they have 10 to 12 minutes, and we have a timer conveniently down in the front. I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this for almost a year now since we came up with the idea of this Engaged Scholarship Summit. What I'd like to do is just introduce everybody briefly, then they'll go through their TED Talks, and hopefully we'll still have some time for questions as a panel afterwards. Our first speaker today will be Kathleen O'Connell. Kathy is an assistant faculty associate in the School of Law. Taking service learning online and building virtual community is the topic of her presentation today, a really exciting, innovative approach to online service learning. Our second speaker today will be Fawn Youngbear Tibbetts, who is an undergraduate student intern, presenting with or on behalf of Cheryl Bauer Armstrong, who is the director of the Earth Partnership and Restore program at the UW Arboretum as part of the graduate school. The title of their program is Indigenous Arts and Sciences Earth Partnership. Our third speaker will be Louis Friedland. Louis is a professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications in the Department of Sociology. He's also the director for the Center for Communication and Democracy in the College of Letters and Sciences. The title of his project will be Madison Commons, a model for service learning in the field of journalism. Our last presentation today is on behalf of Roseanne Clark. Roseanne Clark unfortunately had a family emergency and unexpectedly could not be here today. Roseanne is an associate professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine and Public Health, community-based, and the title of her work is Community-Based Intervention for Women with Postpartum Depression, Living in Poverty, from Efficacy to Effectiveness. And presenting very briefly a synopsis of their work today will be Catherine Von Gering, and she is accompanied in the audience today by Suzanne Murray and Beverly Hutchins and Jake Berkram, and I think we'll acknowledge them in the end. So I'm going to turn it over, and you guys can kick it off.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today and be able to share with you about our project that we've been very excited to work on this past year. What I'd like to do before I talk about the project is talk a little bit about us and who we are to give our project a little bit of context for you. We are the Center for Patient Partnerships here on campus. We are an interdisciplinary center comprised of the schools of law, medicine and public health, nursing, and pharmacy. And what we do is when patients are diagnosed with life-altering illnesses, they come to us and we help them navigate through the healthcare system. That is our service component of what we do. The educational piece of what we do is we train graduate and professional students from the various disciplines that make up our schools, as well as numerous disciplines across campus in consumer health and patient advocacy. So our students partner with patients as they help them navigate through the healthcare system once they've actually been diagnosed. So a year ago in 2012, we actually started tailoring our certificate in programs, our traditional face-to-face programs, to an online learning format. And so since service is such a focused part of what we do, and we were moving to an online format, we needed to begin thinking creatively about how we would move the electronic portion of how we would move electronically into service learning and what we have come to call over the last year e-service learning. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today is our project and how what we've done and how we're still continuing to learn as well. So essentially, we've added the electronic component to service learning, or service learning in a digitally emerging society. So also I want to just pause for a minute here and say that you won't be surprised, and I will say that I see most of our faculty sitting in the audience today, so that they won't mind if I say this, that there was a little bit of hesitation about how we might actually be able to do this when we originally started. And so my hat's off to them. They brought their spirit of adventure and their sense of play. And over the course of this last year, we've actually had so much fun being able to really develop this e-service learning notion. But a part of the hesitation was because of the unique nature of what we do and the very special partnership and relationships that occur between students and the clients or patients that they're assigned. Many times when patients come to us, of course, this can be some of the most challenging and difficult times of their life. And so we really value the relationships that we establish as a faculty and students with those patients, and we didn't want to lose that special element when we moved to an online format. So this was very much on our minds at the forefront. How can we maintain our unique voice and our sense of community as we move to an online format? So, and again, this is an element of the importance of establishing community for us. So these are some of the tools that we've actually been using to move ourselves into an e-service learning format, and we've been having a lot of fun actually experimenting and playing with these. One of the things that I'd like to mention right now is through the use of Adobe Connect, which is one of the software programs that we use to bring us all together when we're all in different places. We're actually using it today to beam in two of our online students, Cam from Raleigh, North Carolina, and also Cindy from Atlanta. And my colleague Mark is holding up the laptop there where they're actually beaming in and watching the presentation. Thank you, Mark. So what have we gained from service learning? We certainly have gained greater and larger access to clients, and we certainly have gained a wider access to an audience of students. But what we discovered along the way was some surprises that we didn't necessarily anticipate, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about those in a moment. But first, let's take a look at what e-service learning looks like. The really cool thing about this is that we don't have any geographic limitations like we've had before in the past. So this is traditionally what our face-to-face curriculum has looked like. We've had our faculty supervisor, our student, and our patient all in the same room at the same time. But now with the tools that I just showed you on the previous slide, we're actually able to mix this up and have any combination that's basically possible. We can have the clinical supervisor and the patient in the same room with the student beaming in, and again, the possibilities are numerous. So we've been playing with all the different versions of this. And in this particular slide, we have everyone in different places, and also in this particular slide, we can have everyone in different places, and then if we need a consultant, we can access that consultant wherever that consultant might be and bring them in and help us troubleshoot for issues with clients or patients. This is an example of the Adobe Connect session, which is how Cam and Cindy are actually beaming in today. But every Wednesday evening, we meet with our students. We all come together in this electronic format, and this is what we call our clinical seminar. And all of the students have been assigned clients here, and they present at the clinical seminar with the issues and challenges that their patients are actually facing. And this is the way, through our interdisciplinarity, we're able to come together and collaboratively and creatively problem solve the issues that they're actually facing and experiencing. We have e-meetings. This is one of our faculty who's meeting with Cam, who's actually in Raleigh, North Carolina. We actually e-meet with one another. That's just become a daily practice for us. This is one of the surprises beyond just reaching a larger client and student audience that really has been just really been fun. And let me just say that the apprehension on the part of the faculty that I mentioned previously, I think we quickly started to overcome, and the way that we approached that was was playing with small gains, or playing with the technology and having small wins and then building upon those small wins. And actually what it did is made it much more, it made us more willing to take more risks, let me put it that way. The more comfortable we got and the more confident we got, and the more we realized that when we practiced, we weren't necessarily going to break anything. And so, so we've gained a lot of confidence in that regard. And also, I think it's really helped to just make us better teachers. We have been teaching for face-to-face and for a very long time, and we have a very unique and special curriculum. But when we began exploring how we can do this in an online format, and again, making sure that we wanted to really maintain the sense of community and relationships that we had in our face-to-face programs, it's just really been a lot of fun and really re-energized and reinvigorated us as teachers. And in fact, it's not uncommon at all that I'll have faculty stop by my office and say, hey, I tried this today and it worked really well and I'm super excited. Or, hey, I tried this today and it didn't work really well, but I know exactly what I want to do next time, so that it can go better. So again, we've become much more willing to take risks in that regard. And the other thing I want to say about that when I talk about our creativity and our sense of play is also at the forefront of everything we do. We want to make sure that we're grounded in sound education and pedagogical principles. So again, that's a really big focus for us. Another really cool thing that happened, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but what we discovered is that when we initially started, our students were bringing their informal digital behaviors with them that they were learning in social media like Facebook and Twitter to their encounters with clients and faculty. And at the same time, the clients and faculty didn't have the tech savvy to really be able to troubleshoot on the spot. And so when we realized what was occurring, we intentionally brought clients, but also the faculty and students together. And they have been working on what we've started calling e-professionalism, or professionalism in an electronic environment. And so they're actually co-creating this knowledge together in real time, which has been really fun and also energizing. So this is another Adobe Connect session where we have a patient of the center with her husband telling their story, and all of the students are beaming in from different places and around the country. This is our clinical faculty member, Pete, and he's facilitating the actual discussion, and the students are actually typing in questions while Kirsten and Matt are telling their story, and Pete is fielding the questions and acting as basically moderator. And then at the end of this particular session, we opened up to everyone's webcams, and they were all able to talk and ask questions and see each other. So again, this is just another way that we're using technology. But the heart of this really is, again, having Kirsten and Matt present with the students, yet this is another way that we bring clients together with students to share their stories, and their stories are so powerful for our students. In fact, we very frequently say that our clients are our greatest teachers. This is actually one of the quotes from one of the students that attended the session, very powerful sentiment that was echoed by the other students. And this actually is very powerful and healing for our clients as well. This is Kirsten, who was there with her husband Matt, sharing their story. So the other really, really cool thing that we've discovered this past year is that it is possible to be able to sustain and maintain that rich and deep sense of community in an electronic environment. And we're very pleased about that. We've learned so much over this last year, and will continue to learn so much as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Anim Buju, Gidagon Kunz, Indigenous Cause, Fan Youngbear Tibbets, Mukman, Indigenous Cause, Gaja Kwaja, Makag, Winnabagashish, Indunjaba, Holly Youngbear Tibbets, Ia Na, Me Na Mama, and Frederick Wesley Tibbets Jr., Ia Na Nimbaba, Mukwa and Dudam. So I said hello and welcome. My name is Fawn, but my Catholic name is Fawn Youngbear Tibbets. I come from the Leech Lake Reservation on Lake Winnabagashish in northern Minnesota. My mother is Holly Youngbear Tibbets, and my father is Frederick Wesley Tibbets Jr. And I always start this way by acknowledging where I come from so that you know where I'm from. And it's a good way for me to also acknowledge my forefathers. And I think it's really cool that we can share our language sometimes. I know there are some other Ojibwe speakers that are in the audience, so please forgive me as I'm just learning. I've been asked to come and talk about the Indigenous Arts and Sciences program at the Earth Partnership for Schools. Our program is housed at UW-Madison Arboretum, and our mission, I'm going to just stop for 1 second. I'll tell you a little bit about what our background is, again, so that you can get the history, and then about the new program and what we're doing. So our mission was really guided by Aldo Leopold's land ethic. And in brief, that says, when we see the land to something as which we belong, we will begin to use it with love and respect. Out of that, the Arboretum forwarded those missions, among many other great thinkers of the time, by developing an outreach education program. One of those was the Earth Partnership for Schools program. The other part is the Earth Partnership for Families program at the Arboretum. So that's a little bit of our history. Our program really comes out of some ideas, such as ideas brought up by Richard Louv, who is the author of No Child Left Inside, and also the author of Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. Also, another component was brought to us by Herb Broda, and he's a professor of education at Ashland University in Ohio, and he's the author of Schoolyard Enhanced Learning, using the outdoors as an instructional tool and moving classrooms outside. Basically, our professional development training is based around this 10-step model. This is our 10 restoration education steps shown here. And this is our original program. This program has been going for about 20 years on campus, a little longer. So the project of our new program is the Indigenous Arts and Sciences Earth Partnership. We've been going since July. We end this June. Cheryl and Rick, I need to just acknowledge, because without their support, this research would not have been possible at all. And obviously, we're in the Arboretum, and that's an extension of the graduate school. Ira and Minerva Baldwin were our initial funders, along with the Public Center, Morgridge Center for Public Service. And I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous here, so I'm stumbling a bit. I think I'll clear out in a minute, but I'll move on. So what is Indigenous Arts and Sciences? This is a really hard topic, and it's a really hard thing to try and define. People get confused with this all the time. And so what I would like to just do is tell you what our advisors have said, because we put together an advisory committee to actually help us define what that meant. So Indigenous Arts and Sciences is a phrase that conveys the intellectual traditions of Native nations at a highly generalized scale. Native intellectual traditions are as diverse and discrete as the Native nations that have designed and relied on those traditions to inform their lifeways, situate their stewardship, and inform their worldviews. While that diversity is apparent, there are some common themes that resonate throughout intellectual paradigms of Native nations, and these are a pattern of core values. They include relationships, reciprocity, respect, and responsibility. Those have become our guiding principles in the way that we deal with Native communities, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. I need to backtrack for 1 second, because we're going to get into why Indigenous Arts and Sciences, and I have to talk about my experiences before we do that. So prior to ever working with the Earth Partnership for Schools program, I took a class by Professor Patty Lowe. It was the Native American Environmental Issues in the Media course. She received the first round of matching funds from Morgridge. I was a student that received some of that funding, and it paid for some research on the burial sites management plan at the Arboretum. I drafted with students a burial sites management plan and submitted it to the Arboretum. That then led to the publication of my first peer-reviewed scientific journal article and my job with the Earth Partnership. So all of this really has come out of that initial funding. And so I'd like to thank you and acknowledge you for that. Now, what our project committee says, really, the why and the what, is that we're intending to help grow, to helping tribal communities build their own capacity and grow the next generation of stewards so that Native youth can find strength in their cultural heritage and become inspired to explore science careers. Indigenous arts and sciences build upon theoretical frameworks outlined by many scholars who caution against just merely applying Western concepts, and they recommend the adoption of Native-centered approaches and processes. And so what we did was start by looking at who was dealing with tribal communities well and how they were working, and then how we could kind of base that. So the Convening Cultures Keepers was an advisor, which is also another Morgridge funded program. So we submitted the Ira and Minerva Baldwin Foundation, and I thought these were really great because it goes right along with the Morgridge. And they believe that the quality of a university is really determined by the quality of its staff and its students, and that it should provide opportunity for staff and students to share the university's knowledge with the state and the world, but then also to bring that back. And then we used the match with Morgridge, and it was just a nice dueling to support our initial research. I took an action research course looking at problems that I had noticed with the Earth Partnership curriculum. Now this is going to get a little personal. I am a Native mother, I'm an educator, and I'm a scholar. And so I took this course looking at the problems that we had seen. Everything started at European arrival. We had been forgetting what was here before. People had been managing their lands. And so we took a look at those 4 R's. And I think I went the wrong way here. Did I go backwards one? Yeah. Okay. And hosted a series of community dialogues, meet and greets, and I also attended a series of events in the community. And everything that we do is really based off those 4 R's. And what we found out is that it requires loads of face-to-face personal communication to develop these kind of relationships. So we had meetings throughout northern Wisconsin. This is a quote from one of the participants. I would like to kind of move through this quickly because this is not the best, but really our community dialogues are proposed to develop working relationships among our partners, teachers, elders, tribal and non-tribal members, students, and their organizations. And these gatherings are really a way to identify issues and strengths within the community, but also for their opportunities and our rules of engagement and how we'll deal with each other. So we held a series of these dialogues in Bad River and Ashland, and Bad River, Red Cliff, Ashland, and surrounding areas, I should say. And last summer, we held our first Indigenous Arts and Sciences Water Stewardship Institute. Everything that we've done, we always put our 4 R's on. It's kind of become our motto. So we started, obviously water became really important, and that was something identified by our community members. So we started with a 2-day tour of the Bad River watershed at the proposed mining site in northern Wisconsin. We followed the water and the watershed with geologists, biologists, tribal elders, and scientists. We heard the stories of the watershed, we heard the geology, but we also did a water ceremony at the Glyphwick offices and talked about connections to land and water. And this was 2 days of our week-long institute. Our participants range from 6 to 60 plus years old. About half of the participants were Native, about half were non-Native. About 20 of the 40 were teachers. The rest were either formal or non-formal educators. They were community members or they were students. We had 2 elementary school students. We had 2 middle school students, 2 high school students, and five or six, if you include myself, college students from all together. And this was really identified, the need for whole community learning was identified by our partners as being really important, and that we shouldn't just be offering these institutes for teachers because of the importance of everybody needing to relearn what we were talking about. So I'm going to talk briefly about what we're doing next. We appreciate always the funding that we're getting, and now we're looking for more to continue doing the great work that we've done. We've started conversations in Lac du Flambeau and LCO. LCO has been really slow, and it's like some of our communities, we're just getting started and identifying those partners through these dialogues. In other places, like Lac du Flambeau, the teams have really picked it up and they own it, and now they're moving on. And they're planning their own institute. I just wanted to finish up and talk a little bit then what we do. So the program was really developed through this kind of engaged scholarship and research. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing now. And so I think the passion that I've learned through doing this and my dedication to service learning, that I've been able to pass it on, and I kind of say it's viral now, is that the students that have come are all engaging in their own service learning projects. So I'd like to just tell you about these students and what they're doing. Mike Parks is an undergraduate. He's in his first year. He's from the Stockbridge Muncie Band, and he's doing an interpretive documentary photography installation of the proposed mining in northern Wisconsin called Mining Through the Lens, which will be on campus. We have Dylan Jennings. He's a Bad River Band undergraduate, and he's doing bison skin art and evaluation of our curriculum. We have Henry Pear Jr., he's Ho-Chunk from Nebraska, and he's doing artistic temporary installations of interpretive art in the Arboretum and helping us build a geometry in nature activities. So that's just a little bit of what we've done, and I'd like to say thank you for all of your support, because without it, it wouldn't have been possible.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank John and Tasha for helping us be here today, and the Morgridge Center for including me on this podium. I'm here to talk to you today about the Madison Commons, which is a community news organization that we've been building for about 7 years almost here in Madison from the ground up. Nothing like seeing it. I wish I could go live and show you some of what we're doing here, but essentially what you can see is that the Commons is a community-based news site. It's designed as a research project, but it's also an institution building project. I think almost everyone in this room knows that news organizations and local communities are in trouble. Newspapers are failing all over the United States. They're cutting back. They're not covering the stories that they used to cover about communities that are absolutely essential to community life. And one of the key premises of the Madison Commons is that without stories about communities can't actually function well. And so the Commons was designed to tell those stories about local communities, in this case, of course, Madison, and do that in a way that we're filling the gap that newspapers are starting to leave. As they recede, as they only cover the highest level kind of issues, the state, local government on the one hand, or what we'd call I don't want to be pejorative here, but with the sort of news you can use, it's leaving this giant gap in the coverage of local communities, and the Commons is designed to fill that gap. The Commons is a student-run organization. We have student editors, student editors in each of our 4 major areas of food education, city life, and the environment. We cover all Madison neighborhoods with a focus on the north, east, and south side. So when you were saying that there's no subsidy for going out and talking to people, that's what our students do. We find that when students go through journalism, they can learn lots of things by sitting and writing and working for the campus papers, but there's actually no substitute for going out and talking to people that you don't know, who aren't like you, having to ask them about their stories, having to ask them about their issues in their communities, and finding out really what they're about. And that's what our students do every day. As I said, we focus on these 4 major issues, including the city, which includes social issues, homelessness, housing, and social services. They asked us to include this, so I did. I just want to draw attention to my co-PIs. Hernando Rojas is a great young scholar. Both Hernando Rojas and Sue Robinson have just been promoted to associate professor, but they started out working on the Commons when they were assistant professors. And I'm very, very proud. One of the proudest things I'm most proud of is that their work on the Commons actually helped get them their promotion. I think that's a huge change here at UW. For the first time, engaged scholarship, really the first time overall, engaged scholarship is being recognized as a part of what we need to do for tenure. And so both of them included their work on the Commons as part of their tenure portfolios, and they're great scholars in their own right, but it had something to do with their achieving that goal, and I'm very proud of that. Our funders, we have a long list, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I know that Community Shares is going to be discussed here a little bit later today. Community Shares is one of our major partners, which represents 60-plus organizations in the local community. They've actually been helping to fund us at a low level, but a significant level for us. One of the principles of the Commons is that it should be sustainable. It doesn't really do any good to create a community news institution if you're always essentially relying on outside money. So one of our core research goals is to figure out how this kind of project can be sustainable in the new local news ecology, as we refer to it. And so we've looked for many small contributions, not a number of large contributions, but many small contributions by proving our value to different groups and organizations in the community, including news organizations themselves. We're getting enough small contributions, by which I mean under $5,000, to sustain ourselves year in and year out, and it's been 7 years now. Of course, we do thank Community Shares Wisconsin Nonprofit Association, the Morgridge Center itself, and I'll talk more about the Morgridge Center's contribution to our work, which has been critical. And then our media partners. We also received a Baldwin grant, and we received early seed funding from the Knight Foundation because this was a national experiment. And I want to stress this. It is a website, and it looks like a website, but it's also a way of developing a new kind of news. And the Knight Foundation originally funded us to seed a new kind of news, to develop a new kind of news that was sustainable in local communities, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. These are our current crew of students. This gives you at least some idea. S means scholarship, and I'll explain that in a moment. But our students, we have roughly 15 to 20 students who cycle through every semester. Some of them stay for 2 semesters. Some of them even stay for 3. And they tend to see this as one of the most important formative experiences that they've had in the journalism school, precisely because they are getting out of the building, they're going into neighborhoods, and they're talking to people that they wouldn't have talked to otherwise. But this is a good example of what our crew looks like. So I want to just introduce you to a few of them real quickly. This is Nora Hurdle, our managing editor. She's a master's student in the School of Journalism and Mass Comm. Nora has been a great leader, but she basically is going on to do work with the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism, which is a fine local organization housed in the journalism school that does investigative journalism for the state of Wisconsin on the new nonprofit news model that we're also playing a part of. So Nora's been a key leader. She's the 4th editor that we've had. Our previous editor, Naya Mukherjee, is now at National Public Radio. Sarah Karen was at Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism as well, and now is moving on to full-time employment. So our editors tend to go on to become journalists, and this is an important part of what we're doing. We expose them to the community, they go out and do community stories, and then when they become professional journalists, they remember this. And I want to prove this to you right now, in a few moments rather. Rory Linnane is a graduating senior. She basically discovered a new aspect of community, realizing that we build community one person and one bean plant at a time, as she says. And she understands now that going out in the community and providing this news is a form of service. We are building an institution that helps the community thrive. And that's the key element of our service learning program. We want our young journalists to know that you cannot grow as a journalist unless the community that you are serving is also growing. And the only way for that community to thrive is if its stories are being told, and they're being told regularly, and they're being told from the grassroots, and they're being told in a way that's accessible. This is Allison Durr. She's currently our education editor. She's right now preparing a marvelous story about the achievement gap in Madison, which almost everyone here I'm sure knows about. She's trying to tell the story of the achievement gap through the eyes of students in Madison. So rather than just relying on educators and institutional officials, she's actually creating an entire series built around the voices of students and parents to have the community hear what they think about the achievement gap, how it actually affects them, and parents from all backgrounds in Madison. Susan Endress, I love her quote here. She says that she's learned about communities surrounding the university, which feels like a big isolated bubble within the city. She hadn't thought about doing this before, and now she associates journalism with making a difference in people's lives, and that's not usual. That's not normally what journalists think of. They think of themselves as telling the truth, being fair and accurate, and of course those are important things, but we also want our young journalists, the next generation of Madison journalists, to know that making a difference in people's lives is a part of what they should do as journalists, and in fact they won't sustain journalism unless they do. Steve Horn grew up in Madison. He grew up on the east side, and Steve basically said the Commons gave him a chance to get a look at his own city. He connected people with his own neighborhood in a different way, at a deeper level than he ever had before. It helped him to understand his community, even though he'd grown up here all of his life. Caitlin Gath is one of our alumna. She's now working as a marketing manager at the Greater Southwest Development Corporation in Chicago. She credits her experience with the Madison Commons with helping to open that horizon, how you can do community-based work in her case, that she's not doing journalism, but she has tried to replicate the Commons in Chicago. So we see ourselves as seeding this work and bringing it out to the people of the community and the state. This is one of our great stars, Anna Eisendorf, who's an alumna. She was just a great reporter and a great editor. She's now in Houston at Teach for America and is a 7th grade English teacher. And Anna wants to write about education from the grassroots up, so she's taking what she learned in the Commons to report about education in a new way. Really briefly, we have partnerships all over town. Our key partners have said that they found us beneficial. We've been providing training for our community partners. Training that allows them to actually plug into the new social media world and understand how it works so that they can extend their effectiveness. So while we're doing community-based reporting, we're also looking to extend our reporting into the new world of digital media and to train the community organizations themselves how to extend themselves into that world so that they can do for themselves. And it's surprising, you might be surprised, I was surprised at how many community organizations actually haven't prepared themselves for the social media world, partly because they're led by old people like me. No, not all of them, not all of them. Really briefly, our outcomes. I just want to go through these real quickly for you. We've increased the flow of the community news to the Madison community. 10,000 readers read about Superintendent Nerad's meeting at the Centro Hispano. We had huge coverage of that meeting, and it showed that there was interest. People wanted to know what these grassroots education meetings were like. The newspapers didn't cover them at all. We were the only ones who covered these meetings in town. 8,000 people read about the meetings on the achievement gap on the north side. We've partnered with WIC Channel 3000. They have upward of 1 million page views a month, so the Commons is a funnel upward. We do this relatively smaller local community-based grassroots reporting, but it goes out through WISC to the entire community at a very large rate, as you can see, 1 million page views a month. And we now have an open gateway with them. We can automatically post. There's no gatekeeper there, so we can choose what we post. Outcomes in the School of Journalism and Mass Comm. More than 30 Morgridge scholarship students, and we call all of our money from the Morgridge Center, all of our matching money goes to providing scholarships for our students. Essentially, this allows students who otherwise would have to be working at usually minimum wage jobs and oftentimes couldn't afford to do journalism otherwise to work on this kind of a project. And we've supported at least 30 so far, and I expect to support many more over the years ahead. I'm very proud that we've integrated service learning into the curriculum in the entire journalism school. So now what we do is an official part. And I believe, I don't know if we're the first, but I believe we're one of the first departments to actually now have service learning included in required courses. So in our advanced reporting class, this kind of service learning is a part of what we do. And finally, we've trained hundreds of citizen reporters, provided technical assistance to nonprofits, and we've trained dozens of partnerships all over the city. So I'm really happy to have been able to share this with you today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Catherine Von Jering. I am working with Roseanne Clark on a project related to addressing postpartum depression in Wisconsin home visiting programs. I work for the state of Wisconsin in the Department of Health Services. And I wanted to first acknowledge, and I do not have slides. Roseanne has slides, but I am going to keep it very brief, so I will just talk, if that's okay. I first wanted to acknowledge our funding source, the Ira Aniva Baldwin Wisconsin Idea Endowment, and then the matching funds through the Morgridge Center. We have multiple students that are working on our project, and some of them are here today. So we have some undergraduates, Jacob Burkhaven, who is really interested in emotional and behavioral issues in children and adolescents. Brenna Latto, who is interested in child psychology. Alec Philip Lerner, who is is working towards medical school and also interested in mental health. Beverly Hutchinson, who is interested in connecting biology to a culturally inclusive public audience in a meaningful way to establish evidence-based treatment for women with postpartum depression. And then we have a graduate student who is also here today, Colette Fisher. She is interested in interdisciplinary practices for children that are at risk for emotional, behavioral, and academic issues. And then we also have a recently hired a student who is recently graduated and has been hired through the project to work as the research specialist on coordinating the project. So a little bit more background about what we're doing. So our project is working to address postpartum depression, and it is a major public health issue. So about 10 to 15% of all women who have a birth experience postpartum depression. And then it's higher with women that are living in poverty. It's about 35 to 58%. So the aims of our project are to integrate the culturally adapted, evidence-based mother-infant therapy group intervention for postpartum depression and with a community-based participatory research component also. So working with the state-funded home visiting programs in the Department of Children and Families, we are working in 4 counties and 1 tribal nation in Wisconsin to implement these groups. And there's 3 components of these groups. The first one is a separate mothers group, and then a separate infant group, and then they come together and it's a mother-infant dyadic therapy group. And so we're working with the home visitors to be a part of that effort in seeing what works for the home visiting programs and then also what works for the mothers. And so we're involving students in a very meaningful service learning through assessment, intervention, and then program evaluation. So the students thus far have been working, some of them have specific projects that they've been working on to do some assessment of data related to the mother-infant therapy groups. And then they've also increased their knowledge base in infant and early childhood mental health. And they've increased learning about development and then parent-infant interactions and assessment approaches. And so they will also be a part of the mother-infant therapy groups. So they will be a part of the infant group, being with the infants under supervision. And then they will have weekly reflective practice time so that they can assess themselves and think about what is going to happen in the next week. And then they'll also be a part of the pre and post assessment piece. So that is, in a nutshell, what our project is and the involvement of the students. And three people are here today, so if, as we go through, I'm sure that they'd be very happy to talk about their specific piece of it also. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for all. No, you stay here. You have to answer questions. You can't go yet. This has just been totally impressive, overwhelming. I just can't even describe. And I know these programs. I know them by title. We've been helping you set them up with the grant program, and it still doesn't substitute for hearing in person, much less being there in person to understand them. So we have about, actually, 15 minutes if you'd like to use this for question and answer. I'll also let you know that we do not have a program break, so if you would like to go back and get something to drink or to eat, this would be a good time, but I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And I actually especially want to thank Catherine. Catherine just jumped in today to speak when Roseanne had a family emergency, so you did a wonderful job. Thank you. So let's open it up for questions.
For Lou, I just want to hear a little bit more in terms of the training that you would provide to community. I work for a nonprofit, the South Madison Promise Zone in South Madison, for social media and what that all might entail. I think it's really important.
Well, we've run a series of workshops out of community shares. We've also trained citizen journalists over the years, and we're willing to do those workshops on a one-to-one basis, and we certainly would be willing to work with South Madison Promise Zone. What we do is we can do two kinds of workshops, really. One is a citizen journalism workshop where citizens learn how to write and report, and we have some basic guidelines about how to do that. We don't try to teach people to be professionals, but we stress fairness and accuracy, which are sort of the basics, if you will, but also how to tell a good story with a beginning, middle, and an end. We've trained more than 100 citizen journalists in our time in existence. We also can teach people how to think about using social media, Facebook and Twitter, as strategic communication tools, because now those are the coin of the realm for getting your message out, and a lot of people aren't aware how to do that, so we can work with community groups on how to do that as well.
Thanks to all four of you. That was terrific. I also have a question for Lou, specifically regarding your comment about the evolution of journalism, not just facts and figures, but now really adding value and doing good in the community. How has that transition in the whole industry come to be, and why is that such an important direction?
Well, that's a big question. I spent an hour on that on Wisconsin Public Radio the other night, but I don't have that now. Basically, in a nutshell, newspapers are still the source of most local community news, whether they're via Twitter, Facebook. It doesn't really matter about the new media universe. You can forget about it, because if something's reported, it's likely to come from a local newspaper, but local newspapers are in financial trouble. So the problem then becomes, the first thing to go are the kind of stories that we tell about local community organizations, local community groups, grassroots stories. That's what gets cut out first, because newspapers can't put boots on the ground to go tell those stories anymore. So our goal is to not just do this here in Madison, but to create a national model that shows people how we can collaboratively, in a common way, begin to tell those stories through training citizen journalists, through training people how to use social media, but how to also have this kind of convening space that allows us to bring those stories together, and not least of all offer them almost like a news service to local media. So we're making it cheap, right? When we offer these stories up for free, when WISC takes advantage of them and they're getting out to potentially 1 million people a month, it's not costing them anything. So all 4 of those legs are important parts of what we're trying to do.
Nancy, one thing that struck me as I was listening to all 4 of them is that have you ever met together and talked about what connections you all might have? And I was thinking about what you were just commenting on reporting, and it would be very interesting, I think, to have the Arts and Science Earth Partnership be a part of that reporting, or how does she take that to the communities that she wants to take it to, or studying depression, or how do people get connected with the advocacy program? And it was kind of one of those bridges, and I was just wondering if the Morgridge Center has thought anything about that.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think creating a community of scholars is one of the things that is a high priority, certainly for the Morgridge Center, but I would say all across campus. And as we begin to raise awareness and elevate the recognition for the kind of work that's going on, as I said, in all schools and colleges, I think we're going to be able to do this. One of the things I've seen done in the past, and this is a great idea for us to maybe explore next year, is to begin having regular reflections among the PIs or appropriate partners they want to include. I mean, service learning is all about reflection, yet here's a great opportunity to do this among the PIs. So I think that's a wonderful idea, Mary, and I think we'll think about that to help us really get our arms around this community of scholars. Thank you.
I have a question here for Kathy. You mentioned that you felt as if you, with your e-service learning, you were able to establish community online. And I teach courses online here. We depend heavily on asynchronous tools, Dropbox, discussion board, things like that. It seems that you relied heavily on a lot of the synchronous or the real-time audio and visual. Were you able to use other tools other than the real-time tools that you felt contributed to building that community? Because that's a real challenge for us teaching online too.
Right, so within our program we have 4 courses. We have a 12 to 16 credit certificate program, and our Introduction to Patient Advocacy course, as well as our Advanced Level Models course, we use an asynchronous platform. We actually use Drupal, and we do a lot with discussion. We do discussion forums, asynchronous discussion forums. We have them do readings. We use a lot of visual imagery and music and poetry and art and you name it. And we, in our Introduction to Patient Advocacy course, it actually is comprised of 13 modules over the course of the semester, each covering a different topic, but each of the modules follows the same format, and it is asynchronous. I mean, generally, the students have a week to complete each module. So we do a lot of all of it. We do synchronous as well as asynchronous. In the clinical portion of the program, where the students are actually partnered with patients, the clinical supervision and also, as you saw, our seminars on Wednesdays are all synchronous. But we also have additional clinical modules in that course that students can access, and it's all self-paced. So relative to clinical trials and medical decision making and things like that. So we do a variety of it.
This question is for anyone. Given that service learning courses do feature and value reflection, can you comment on whether the reflections right as students are doing the service learning are the most potent, or does there need to be some time that passes before they recognize what the value of the service learning courses were?
Maybe as a student can answer that. For me, it's both, because I can have my initial feelings, and that's really important, that gut feeling of what I'm researching or what I'm doing. But then I also really need time to digest it and think critically about what I've learned or what somebody maybe didn't tell me by what they were saying, and really think about it. And so it's immediate, and then the long term, I think, is really, you need both, and a good balance of both. So you need them responding immediately, but then you need them to think in the long term, like, how is this impacting what I'm doing or the research that I'm doing? And it's really, you've got to do both.
I know that this is focused on the student learner, but I had a question about the e-learning classroom and technology, access to technology for clients, and if they're provided with that, or if that results in some communities being able to participate in this sort of project or not. And then for the person, the indigenous arts, can you go through the 4 R's again? Those are really powerful. Thank you.
So for the e-learning question, we basically give our clients a choice of how they would rather communicate with us. So if they're in town, we can do that in person. If we generally can do a lot by phone as well, or email. We don't do much with snail mail anymore because that's the clients don't prefer that. So, but we always offer them a choice.
So I was just asked to review our 4 R's, and you know, we could really add a lot more. We're talking about restoration, relationships, reciprocity, respect, and responsibility. I also said relevance, and lots of other R words came up, but those are the 4 that what we found out are the basics in almost every indigenous community. And what we were looking at really is not just a model for dealing with indigenous communities right in Wisconsin, but developing a model that we could maybe pick up and use in an indigenous community anywhere. And I always tell people, remember, you're all indigenous to somewhere, right? And that those are the kind of models that we're looking at developing. So it's a much larger scale project. I hope that helps.
I also just wanted to add, we with our clients use telephone quite a bit as well.
So I had an answer to Mary Gilbranson's question about faculty being able to talk to each other about these kinds of interdisciplinary projects or from different disciplines. So the Morgridge Center has a new program called CUE, Community University Exchange, and this is all about engaged scholarship. In fact, some of the grad students that are here today are called Engaged Scholarship Graduate Fellows, and they work on these CUE projects. On April 16th, we will have what we're going to call our first CUE Mixer. So this is meant for any faculty member, any staff member, and we're going to bring in community partners from all over the city to talk to each other about other synergies that they might be able to create with each other. So we're thinking about it, and it's coming next month.
Thank you, Beth. One more question over here.
Fawn, I thought maybe you might be able to talk a little bit about our cascading model of service learning, because we have the college students doing service learning, but then they're helping high school students who do service learning, and they're helping younger kids do service learning.
Yeah, so basically what we are working with, as Rick was saying, engaging this on multiple levels. So we have like tribal elders that are mentors to teachers, and they go in and work with them, and they're engaging at that level. And then, as Rick was saying, we have 2 college students like from Northland College, and they have Ashland High School students that they're working on projects. And these are really intense scientific research projects. Some of these are about DDT and the long-term effects to eagles' nests still today in Wisconsin. And then it goes down the road. So I've been working with the middle school ACES chapter, and then they're training elementary school kids. So it's kind of a revolving door of service learning that we've created through our project. And I just hope that it can keep going.
That's great. Another question over here?
Mine's really a comment, because what's so exciting, you're talking about the future. And I'm thinking now, 40 years from now, a group of people sitting there looking back to see not just what it did for the individuals involved up there, but the whole community. And I think you're doing an effective job of really bringing the university and the community together where everybody benefits. So I just am impressed with what you're doing.
Thank you. Any other last questions here for our panel? Well, let's thank these presenters again for the wonderful job they were doing.